At 4:12 local time, the Strait of Hormuz sat quiet, but the Persian Gulf never sleeps, not since the tanker war of 1987. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower was 90 miles southwest of the strait, her flight deck dark, her strike package armed and waiting for a launch order that hadn't come yet. Two destroyers flanked her, the USS Gravely to the northwest, the USS Nitze to the southeast. Standard carrier strike group geometry, the kind of formation the Navy has been running in this water since Operation Earnest Will. What wasn't standard was the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye that had been orbiting at 25,000 feet for 6 hours without rotating out. Her crew had been watching a pattern develop slowly enough that it almost looked like nothing. Almost. 11 fishing vessels, scattered across a 40-mile arc northeast of the strike group, each one stationary, each one sitting on a bearing that, if you drew a line through all 11 positions on a chart, described a perfect targeting arc centered on the Eisenhower. The Hawkeye's senior controller keyed her radio at 4:09. Strike, banger 601. Possible picket line bearing 47 through 83. 11 contacts, all stationary, no AIS, no fishing activity for 4 hours. Recommend you wake someone up. Someone was already awake. On the Gravely, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Haas had been staring at those same contacts for 90 minutes. 8 years of surface warfare, 2 previous deployments to 5th Fleet. She knew what patient looked like when it was wearing a disguise. She didn't key the VLS. She called the captain. "Sir, I think they're waiting for us to do something first." Captain Merrick was on the bridge in 90 seconds. He looked at the plot for 4 seconds and said one word: flank. The Gravely accelerated to 30 knots and swung northwest, widening the defensive envelope. The Nitze mirrored her to the southeast without being told. Both TAOs had been on the chatnet for an hour. They didn't need voice comms, they already knew what the other was thinking. At 4:17, 2 fishing vessels lit their engines simultaneously. At 4:18, the Hawkeye called it. Strike, banger 601. 2 contacts now moving, bearing 61, speed increasing through 40 knots. No longer calling these fishing vessels. At 4:19, every contact on the arc lit up at once. 11 boats became 34 contacts in 40 seconds. The fishing vessels had been tenders, each one sitting dark for hours with 2 or 3 IRGC Navy fast attack craft tied alongside in the black water, invisible to radar at rest, waiting for a single signal. Revolutionary Guard Corps swarm tactics, perfected in these waters over decades. The Hawkeye operator said later she'd never seen a coordinated reveal happen that fast, like someone flipped one switch and turned on an entire parking lot. On the Gravely, the 1MC fired. General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle stations. Reason for general quarters, multiple inbound surface contacts. On the Nitze, the same call 11 seconds later. The MH-60R off the Gravely's fantail had been sitting at 5-minute alert since midnight. It was airborne in 4. 2 Hellfires per side, door gunners scanning east before the wheels left the deck. The Gravely's Aegis combat system sorted contacts by speed and bearing. The AN/Spy-1 radar tracking 34 fast movers in a converging arc, some showing the thermal signature of bow-packed explosives on the helicopter's FLIR. The cheap solution: one-way boats. Drive it into the hull at 40 knots and there's no coming back, but out here there's nowhere to come back to anyway. The TIO didn't have time to engage them one at a time. Mount 51, TAO. Batteries released, surface mode. Priority contacts bearing 55 through 70. The MK-45 5-inch gun swung northeast and opened fire. 70-pound shells with proximity fuses don't need a direct hit. The expanding fragmentation ring does the work from 25 meters out, shredding fiberglass hulls and outboard engines across a radius wide enough to turn a coordinated attack run into a debris field. The autoloader cycled at 20 rounds per minute. 4 contacts destroyed or stopped dead on the first pass. The remaining 30 split, half angling for the Gravely, half pushing south toward the Nitze. The Gravely heeled hard to port at flank speed, throwing white water off her stern, breaking the coherence of the attack. A dozen boats coming in together can overwhelm a ship's defenses. The same dozen arriving in sequence are just arithmetic. The MK-38 25mm stabilized cannon picked up the lead boat at 2,200 meters and walked rounds across the water until the engine housing detonated. The MH-60 put a Hellfire into the second. The remaining boats scattered to regroup. On the Nitze, the geometry was uglier. 15 contacts inbound from the south and southeast, angles spread wide enough that no single weapon covered both flanks. The TAO swung the 5-inch at the largest concentration and put the MK-38 and the .50 cals on the secondary bearing. Not a clean solution. There are no clean solutions at 4:20 in the Strait of Hormuz, with 15 boats closing from 2 directions. He made the call and lived with it. Then the EW operator on the Gravely broke the rhythm entirely. TAYO EW X-band emissions bearing 18, shore-based, targeting mode. The coast of Iran was 60 miles north. Haas didn't look up from the plot. She already knew what was coming. The boats were never the main event. They were never meant to sink a destroyer. They were meant to hold every weapon on both ships pointed at the surface picture, drain the crew's focus, and occupy the TAO's eyes at the exact moment the real threat came off the rails. 2 anti-ship missiles, sea-skimming at 6 meters altitude, already 40 miles out and closing at just under the speed of sound. A shore-based battery on the Makran coast had been building a passive targeting solution for 90 minutes, watching both destroyers without transmitting, accumulating bearing and speed data from the ship's own radar emissions. It never tripped the threat library. It just listened in the dark, the way a patient hunter listens, and it picked this exact moment to fire. Both ships fighting boats. Maximum distraction, minimum engagement time. The geometry was deliberate down to the second. Tau, Captain, prosecute. 3 SM-2s left the Gravely's forward VLS cells in rapid sequence. Blast doors cycled. Smoke cleared. The SPG-62 fire control illuminators slewed northwest and began time-sharing between 4 inbound tracks, painting each one long enough for the missile to reacquire in terminal phase, then slewing to the next. Think of it as a flashlight flicking between 4 moving targets in the dark, 400 meters of closure happening in every gap between flicks. The missile flies blind in those gaps. The math has to work out anyway. Chaff rocketed off the launcher, the nautical equivalent of throwing a fistful of mirrors into the air and hoping the incoming missile falls in love with its own reflection instead of yours. The Gravely heeled hard to present minimum radar cross-section to the inbound seekers. First SM-2 connected at 11 miles. Clean kill. The second lost guidance on a blind spot and went ballistic into the water 200 meters short of reacquisition. The third and fourth connected at 8 and 6 miles respectively. One C-802 still inbound. The CIWS took it at 900 meters. The white dome on the 3 level that sees a contact classifies it and opens fire without asking anyone's permission, because at terminal range there is no time left for anyone's permission. If R2-D2 had an older brother who skipped charm school and went straight into anger management, this is what he'd look like. 4,500 rounds per minute. The missile came apart 60 meters off the port bow. Fragments peppered the hull above the waterline. No penetration. One sailor on the signal bridge took a piece of casing across the forearm and kept his post. On the Nitze, 2 SM-2s for 2 inbound missiles. Clean geometry. Both connected beyond 10 miles. The Nitze never had to use her CIWS. By 4:46, the surface picture was clear. 34 fast attack craft reduced to burning debris and disabled hulls. 4 anti-ship missiles destroyed. Both destroyers intact. No fatalities. 7 sailors with minor injuries across both ships. The crew of the Gravely had been in continuous combat for 27 minutes and had not lost a single system. But the Hawkeye had been tracking something else the entire time. The shore-based battery's radar had transmitted for exactly 19 seconds before going silent. 19 seconds was enough. Bearing locked. Grid reference confirmed. The emissions profile matched a Noor coastal defense battery, Iran's domestically produced anti-ship missile system, the same one that just put 4 missiles in the water. The Hawkeye's crew had been building the targeting package since the first transmission. They didn't need to be asked. On the Eisenhower, the air wing had been watching the engagement on the strike net since the first general quarters call. The deck crew hadn't needed an order. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets were already on the waste catapults with targeting coordinates loaded, engines at idle, waiting for the phone to ring. Behind them on the deck, an EA-18G Growler from VAQ-133 sat loaded with the ALQ-249 next-generation jammer. It doesn't carry weapons. It carries something more useful in the opening seconds of a strike package push into defended airspace. The ability to make every Iranian radar operator on the coast believe his equipment is malfunctioning right up until the moment it isn't his equipment. That's the problem. The phone rang at 449. Dealer flight, strike. You're cleared in hot. Target package uploaded. Good hunting. The catapult officer dropped to one knee and pointed east. 2 Super Hornets came off the deck 11 seconds apart. The Growler followed. The package went feet dry over Iran at low altitude. the ALQ-249 already transmitting, flooding coastal radar frequencies with interference clean enough to look like a software fault and not two strike aircraft pushing north at 500 knots through your air defense network. The Nor battery was 14 kilometers inland, tucked into a ridgeline fold east of Jask, the kind of terrain that makes satellite imagery expensive and attack geometry complicated. 3 transporter erector launchers, a fire control radar truck, a command vehicle, a fuel tanker that had been sitting in the same position long enough that its tire tracks were visible from altitude. The lead Hornet's WSO swept the ridgeline with the ATFLIR targeting pod at 18 miles. Advanced targeting forward-looking infrared. Resolves individual vehicles at ranges that would embarrass a reconnaissance satellite through a field of view roughly the size of a toilet paper tube pointed at a map. The TELs were still there, 2 with empty launch rails, 1 still loaded. A reload crew working by flashlight on the second rail, unhurried, not yet aware that 27 minutes ago their missiles failed to sink anything, and that the battery's radar had transmitted for 19 seconds it couldn't take back. Dealer 11, Dealer 12. 2 TELs bearing 33, 400 meters from the ridgeline road. Third TEL with 1 rail loaded 200 meters north. Fire control truck between them. Call visual. Dealer 12 visual. Confirm 3 TELs and the command vehicle. Dealer 11 in hot. 2 GBU-38s dropped off the rails. 500-pound GPS-guided bombs, guidance fins snapping open, steering solutions already solved before the aircraft pulled off target. The first hit the loaded TEL directly. The secondary detonations from the remaining missile fuel climbed 200 feet off the ridgeline. The second bomb walked into the fire control truck while the crew was still trying to understand what had just happened to the TEL beside them. Dealer 12 rolled in 40 seconds later. 2 more GBU-38s, both TELs with empty rails, clean hits. The fuel tanker caught a fragment from the second detonation and added its own fire to the ridgeline. The Growler held its jamming orbit for another 60 seconds, then turned south. The ALQ-249 kept transmitting until both Hornets were feet wet over the Gulf, and there was nothing left on that ridgeline worth protecting from radar. The battery that had spent 90 minutes patiently building a targeting solution on 2 American destroyers fired 4 missiles, destroyed nothing, transmitted for 19 seconds, and ceased to exist before sunrise. The Eisenhower's flight deck came alive at first light. There were more targets on the morning's package. The find-out phase had barely started. Watch our next video to see what happened when the full strike package pushed north at dawn.